Hey there, fellow explorer, and welcome to a special Espirito edition of the Deep Dive.
Espirito.
Yeah, Espirito Deep, you could say.
I like that.
You know, it's Italian for expert, so we're
Ah,
taking our expertise to the next level for you today.
I'm
All right, let's explore Mecca. Most people know it's Islam's holiest city,
right.
but did you know it was one of the top 10 most visited cities globally in 2023?
Wow.
Millions and millions of people,
That's incredible.
way beyond just those on pilgrimage.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about this city.
For sure.
And it makes
Yeah.
it a perfect deep dive for us.
Totally. So today we're using Mecca's Wikipedia page as our guide
Okay.
to figure out just what is it that makes Mecca so magnetic,
Right.
not just for Muslims, but for like the whole world.
Exactly. It's a global phenomenon.
So we're going way beyond just the religious stuff today
Sounds good.
and like digging into the history, the geography,
Cool.
maybe even a few surprises along the way.
I love surprises.
Are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with Mecca's origins,
Okay.
which are honestly kind of shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, a bit.
I love a good
Me
mystery.
too.
So, like, from an Islamic perspective,
Yeah.
the story starts with Adam. Like, Adam building the very first house of God,
Wow.
following God's instructions, right?
Interesting.
But then that structure was destroyed in the Great Flood.
Oh, wow.
And then Abraham and his son Ishmael rebuilt it.
Right.
It's kind of wild to think that this city,
Yeah.
it's like its birth is connected to these huge figures. you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Really important figures in multiple religions, actually.
Right, exactly. But it's the thing.
What's that?
We don't actually have much solid archaeological evidence
Hmm.
to like back up those early
That's
stories.
interesting.
Yeah, and in fact, the first clear mention we have of Mecca,
Mm-hmm.
that's from a non-Islamic source.
Okay.
It doesn't appear until 741 CE,
Wow. Okay.
which is like long after Muhammad.
Right.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's almost like those early chapters of the story are like hidden, you
Yeah,
know?
there's like waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder though, like, does that lack of evidence tell us anything
About
about how history is like written and interpreted, you know?
That's a really great question.
Right.
It's something that historians have argued about for centuries.
Seriously.
Yeah. Some people believe that this lack of physical evidence could mean
Okay.
that there was a decision to focus on the Islamic version of history.
Interesting.
But other people think that it just comes down to how little archaeology has been done there.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. But either way, it definitely makes you think about the different ways that that people make stories about the past.
Totally. Okay, but let's move on to a different side of Mecca,
Okay.
a side that I feel like doesn't get enough attention.
What's that?
It's Mecca as like a really important trade hub.
Oh, yeah.
And this might surprise some people, but
Yeah?
despite being in the middle of the desert,
Right.
Mecca was a major player in the spice trade back in the 6th century.
That's right.
Crazy, right?
It's true. And you know what? It all comes down to location, location, location.
What do you mean?
Well, Mecca was on some of the biggest caravan routes.
Oh.
So people would travel through there from Africa, the Far East, all over. So
Oh.
it was this essential stopping point.
That's so cool.
And I just love to imagine those caravans
Mhm.
full of spices and leather and, all this amazing stuff,
Hmm.
all passing through this desert oasis.
It really makes you think differently about this ancient city, you know?
Absolutely. It challenges those preconceived notions that people might have.
Totally. And I'm realizing now, like,
Yeah.
it's possible that those early trade routes,
Uh-huh.
they might have actually contributed to Mecca's global influence later.
It's very possible. I mean, trade networks have always been important for spreading ideas and culture.
Right. But I'm curious, how did they manage to do all that trading
Yeah.
in such a, like, difficult environment?
Well, they were really skilled negotiators.
Ah.
So they formed these alliances with the nomadic tribes who, controlled the desert. So they gave them access to water and grazing rights,
In exchange for...
safe passage, and trade partnerships.
Oh, smart.
Yeah, and those alliances gave them a lot of power.
Makes sense.
And they were able to control a lot of the trade happening on the Arabian Peninsula.
So it wasn't just geography, it was like politics, too.
Exactly. It was all about knowing how to make those deals.
So cool. What kinds of things were they trading?
Well, the nomadic tribes brought leather and livestock.
Right.
And then the nearby mountains had mines, so there were valuable metals.
Wow.
And from further away, there were spices and medicines, luxurious fabrics, even slaves.
Wow, that's...
Yeah, and Mecca would trade money and weapons and cereals and wine.
It sounds like a global marketplace, even back then.
It was very
And
international.
all of that must have given them a lot of political power, too.
Oh, absolutely. You could even say that all of this foreshadowed the kind of influence they'd have later.
With Islam.
Exactly.
Now that's what I'm really interested in.
Okay.
We know that Mecca is Muhammad's birthplace,
Yes.
but how did the rise of Islam change Mecca's identity?
Well, actually, before we get into Islam,
Okay.
it's important to remember that Mecca's history wasn't all
Wasn't all what?
peaceful.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were actually some pretty violent times even before, like, the modern era.
What do you mean? Like, what kind of violence?
Well, one event that really stands out is the sacking of Mecca
Okay.
by the Qarmatians.
So what?
The Qarmatians in 930 CE.
Okay, I've never heard of them.
Yeah, so they were a Shia Ismaili Muslim sect,
Okay.
and their beliefs were pretty radical for the time.
So, like, what made them so radical?
Well, they believed in a much more egalitarian society,
Okay.
and they rejected the authority of the Abbasid Caliphate.
Who were they?
They ruled, like, most of the Islamic world at the time.
Okay.
And the Qarmatians also had all these beliefs that were from other religions,
Oh, wow.
which made them pretty controversial.
So they were really mixing it up.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So what happened when they sacked Mecca?
It was really bad.
What'd they do?
They desecrated the Kaaba,
Oh, wow.
and they stole the Black Stone.
Oh, my God.
They massacred a ton of pilgrims.
That's awful.
It was a really huge deal for the whole Muslim world.
Wow.
And it just goes to show that even really holy places,
Yeah.
they can get caught up in violence.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, and it really makes you think about how fragile peace is.
Right, even in places that are supposed to be sacred.
Exactly.
But moving on, I want to learn more about the Ottomans
Oh, yeah.
and their influence on Mecca.
Okay, so actually,
Yeah.
that Qarmatian attack had lasting consequences for Mecca's defenses.
Really?
Yeah, because later rulers, especially the Ottomans,
Nah.
they had to take security way more seriously.
I bet.
So in 1517, the Sharif of Mecca.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
What's a sharif?
Oh, good question. The Sharif of Mecca
Okay.
was basically the leader of the city,
Okay.
and they were usually a descendant of Muhammad.
Oh, wow.
So they had a lot of power.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So anyway, in 1517,
Mhm.
the Sharif, Barakat bin Muhammad,
Okay.
he recognized the Ottoman Sultan as the Caliph of Islam,
Oh, wow.
which basically meant that Mecca was under Ottoman control.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it was.
So from that point on, Mecca was officially part of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So what was it like under Ottoman rule?
Well, they put a lot of money into Mecca.
Okay, yeah.
They improved the water systems.
Okay.
And they made the Grand Mosque bigger.
Wow.
And they even thought about building a railroad.
A railroad.
Yeah, to connect Mecca to the rest of their empire.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they knew how important Mecca was.
Right.
Not just for Muslims, but for them, too.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like, it legitimized their rule.
Exactly. But I'm guessing it wasn't always easy for them to control Mecca.
You're right.
Okay, cool.
So, in the 19th century,
Uh-huh.
the first Saudi state captured Mecca.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they held on to it for a few years.
So that was how the Saudis first came to power.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting.
And that started a power struggle between them and the Ottomans.
How long did it last?
Over a century. It wasn't until the Ottomans collapsed.
After World War I.
Yeah, that the Saudis were finally able to really control Mecca.
So that's when the modern Saudi era began.
Yep, in 1924.
Okay.
And since then, it's been a time of huge change for Mecca.
What do you mean?
Lots of construction projects, expansion of the Grand Mosque,
Yeah.
more modern amenities to handle all the pilgrims.
Right. It's millions of people every year.
It's incredible.
I've seen those pictures,
Yeah.
of Hajj.
Uh-huh.
And it's just like a sea of people.
Big and mind-blowing.
That must be so hard to organize something like
It's
that.
a huge task.
And it's just gotten harder as more people come.
For sure.
But it must also be so amazing to see,
What do you mean?
like, all those people from all over the world.
Yeah,
It's a really unique experience.
absolutely.
But so many people in one place.
Yeah.
That's got to be risky, too.
Oh, yeah, there have been some terrible accidents.
Oh, no.
Like in 1990, there was a huge stampede.
Oh.
More than 1,400 people died.
Oh, my gosh. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It must be really hard for the Saudi government
Yeah.
to keep everyone safe,
Huh.
but also let people experience Hajj.
It's a balancing act for sure.
And it's incredible to think about how much Mecca has changed
Yeah.
from a desert trading post to a global city
It's amazing.
that has to manage this huge annual pilgrimage.
Yeah.
But with all that modernization,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, are people worried about preserving Mecca's culture and history?
That's a great question. And yeah, a lot of people are concerned about that.
Like, what are some of the challenges they're facing?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is it's the impact of all that development on the historical sites.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of debate about paring down old buildings
Okay.
to make space for all these new things.
Like what?
Like hotels and shopping malls.
Mm.
Right.
And infrastructure projects.
I can see how that would be controversial.
Yeah, because some people say it's necessary.
To handle the pilgrims.
Exactly.
But other people think
Yeah.
that it's like erasing history.
Right. They're worried about losing those important parts of Mecca's past.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a really tricky balance,
For sure.
trying to modernize,
Yeah.
but also keep that historical and spiritual feeling.
Are there any, like, examples of this tension?
Oh, yeah. There are a few.
Like what?
Well, one that comes up a lot is the Hajj fortress.
Okay.
It was from the Ottoman era,
Uh-huh.
but they demolished it in 2002
What?
to build the Abraj al-Bait towers.
Oh, wow. Those huge towers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can see how that would be upsetting.
Yeah, a lot of people were really mad about it.
So are they doing anything to try and save the rest of historic Mecca?
There are some groups working on it.
What are they doing?
Well, they're trying to, like, document and preserve the old sites.
And they're pushing for stricter rules about development.
That's good.
But it's definitely an uphill battle.
Yeah.
It's not an easy problem to solve.
And it's not just the buildings, is it?
No, you're right.
Like, I imagine all this change is affecting the culture, too.
Exactly.
People are probably worried about losing Mecca's unique identity.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that.
What else?
There are debates about women's roles
So interesting.
and how to interpret Islam in the modern world.
It sounds like Mecca is trying to figure out how to be a modern city,
Uh-huh.
but also stay true to its traditions.
Exactly. It's at a crossroads.
That makes a lot of sense.
And speaking of challenges,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the environmental impact.
Of Hajj.
Yeah.
Because so many people travel there. It's
Well,
got to be tough to make it sustainable.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge problem.
Like how?
All that energy they need to power the city,
Right.
the water usage, all the trash.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Puts a lot of stress on the environment.
So are they doing anything to address that?
The Saudi government has been trying to do some things.
Like what?
They've been using more solar power,
Okay, that's good.
and they've improved how they handle trash,
Uh-huh.
and they're encouraging people to save water.
Okay.
They even built that high-speed train to Medina
Right.
so people don't have to drive as much.
Those are all good steps.
Yeah, but it's still really hard
Yeah.
to keep up with all the needs of Hajj
Right.
while protecting the environment.
Makes sense.
Some environmental groups say they need to do more.
To do what?
Reduce their carbon footprint
Okay.
and encourage pilgrims to be more responsible
Yeah.
and protect the desert around Mecca.
It sounds like the future of Mecca depends on finding that balance, you know, between the spiritual side of things
Right.
and the economic development
Mm-hmm.
and the culture and the environment.
Exactly. It's a lot to juggle.
It really is.
But that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
Totally. It's like a microcosm of all the challenges we're facing globally.
Right.
We've talked about so much today.
I know, it's been a lot.
From the mystery of Mecca's origins
Yeah.
to all the challenges of being a modern city.
It's been really eye-opening.
I hope our listeners have learned a lot.
Me too.
So one final thought.
Okay.
Even though non-Muslims can't go to Mecca,
All right.
it still affects all of us.
That's true.
It's important to billions of Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a really unique part of history.
I think that's a great way to wrap things up.
Mecca is a city that inspires people.
Yeah,
It makes people curious,
for sure.
and it's constantly changing.
And those changes will affect us all.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for our deep dive on Mecca.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot.
And we encourage you to keep learning about this amazing city.
Until next time, happy
Yeah.
deep diving.